Captain Marcus Blackwood had served the kingdom of Aldermere for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The autumn rain drummed against the castle windows as he made his routine patrol through the royal quarters. Queen Isabel had been acting strangely all week, dismissing her usual attendants and insisting on privacy during her afternoon walks in the garden. Something was wrong. Marcus could feel it in his bones the same way he sensed danger on the battlefield. The Queen's nervous glances, her husband King Edmund's worried expressions, and the hushed conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room, all pointed to a secret that threatened the very foundation of the kingdom. As he rounded the corner near the Queen's private chambers, Marcus noticed something unusual. A large wooden trunk, ornately carved with the royal seal, sat in the corridor where it had never been before. It was positioned oddly, as if someone had placed it there in haste. The trunk was old but well-maintained, with brass fittings that gleamed despite the dim candlelight. Marcus approached carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. Years of protecting the royal family had taught him that even the smallest detail could be significant. The trunk was secured with a heavy iron lock. But as he examined it closer, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were small holes drilled into the sides of the trunk, barely visible unless you looked directly at them. They were too deliberate to be accidental damage. The sound that came next made him freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. Someone was breathing inside the trunk. Without hesitation, Marcus drew his sword and struck the lock with the pommel. The old metal gave way after several blows, and he threw open the heavy lid. What he saw inside made him stumble backward in shock. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, lay curled inside the trunk. Her golden hair was matted with sweat, and her small frame was dressed in simple peasant clothes that couldn't hide her noble bearing. She was unconscious but breathing steadily. More importantly, despite the rough clothing, Marcus recognized her immediately. This was Princess Elena, the king's younger sister, who had supposedly died in a plague outbreak 3 years ago. The entire kingdom had mourned her loss. The royal family had held elaborate funeral rites, and a beautiful monument had been erected in the castle courtyard in her memory. Marcus knelt beside the trunk, his mind racing. If Princess Elena was alive, then everything the kingdom believed was a lie. But why would the royal family fake her death? And why was she hidden away like this, apparently unconscious in a trunk outside the Queen's chambers? As he gently lifted the girl from the trunk, he noticed a small vial tucked into her clothing. It was empty, but the faint smell suggested some kind of sleeping draft. Someone had deliberately kept her unconscious and hidden her in this trunk. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Marcus quickly made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling for help, he gathered the girl in his arms and carried her to his own quarters in the guard tower. Something told him that whoever had done this to Princess Elena was still in the castle. Possibly someone with access to the royal family itself. In his room, Marcus laid Elena on his simple cot and waited. After an hour, she began to stir, her eyelids fluttering as the effects of the sleeping draft wore off. When she finally opened her eyes, they were filled with confusion and fear. Elena looked around the unfamiliar room before her gaze settled on Marcus. Recognition dawned slowly in her young face, and she whispered, "Captain Blackwood? But you're supposed to believe I'm dead." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This confirmed his worst fears. Princess Elena had been deliberately hidden away, and the royal family had participated in the deception. But the question remained, why? Elena struggled to sit up, and Marcus helped her, offering her water from his pitcher. As she drank, she began to speak in halting words about a nightmare that had lasted 3 years. She told him about being taken from her room in the middle of the night, about being told that enemies of the kingdom wanted to hurt her, and about being moved from place to place by people she trusted. "They said it was to protect me," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I haven't seen sunlight in months. They keep me asleep most of the time now. I think they're planning to move me again." Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest. Someone had stolen 3 years of this child's life, and the entire kingdom had been living a lie. But who could have orchestrated such an elaborate deception? It would require resources, access, and the cooperation of multiple people in positions of trust. As Elena continued her story, Marcus began to piece together a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the kingdom. The plague outbreak that supposedly claimed Elena's life had been conveniently timed with a succession crisis. King Edmund had been struggling with rebellious nobles who questioned his right to rule, and Elena, as his only sister, represented a potential alternative claim to the throne. But there was more to this story than political maneuvering. Elena mentioned overhearing conversations about something called the Northern Alliance, and meetings with foreign envoys who spoke in hushed tones about changing the balance of power in Aldermere. Marcus realized that Princess Elena hadn't just been hidden away for her own protection. She had been kept alive as a bargaining chip in a game much larger and more dangerous than he had imagined. Someone was planning to use her claim to the throne to destabilize the kingdom, possibly with the help of foreign powers who wanted to see Aldermere weakened from within. The discovery of Elena alive changed everything. Marcus now held the key to exposing a conspiracy that threatened not just the royal family, but the entire kingdom. But he also knew that the people responsible for this deception would stop at nothing to keep their secret safe. As night fell over the castle, Marcus made a decision that would put both their lives in danger. He would help Elena reclaim her identity and expose the truth, no matter what the cost. But first, they needed to figure out who they could trust in a castle full of potential enemies. The rain continued to fall outside, and somewhere in the darkness, the conspirators who had kept Elena hidden for 3 years were probably discovering that their carefully guarded secret was no longer safe. The next morning brought new dangers and revelations that Marcus had not anticipated. Elena had spent the night in his quarters, but he knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. The castle was already buzzing with unusual activity, and Marcus suspected that someone had discovered the empty trunk. During breakfast in the guard hall, Marcus overheard conversations that confirmed his fears. Several guards mentioned that Queen Isabel had been asking about unusual activities in the corridors, and there were rumors that something valuable had gone missing from the royal quarters. More troubling was the news that foreign dignitaries from the northern kingdoms had arrived unexpectedly and were demanding an immediate audience with King Edmund. Marcus excused himself and returned to his quarters, where Elena was awake and looking stronger than she had the night before. The fresh air and natural sleep had brought color back to her cheeks, and her eyes held a determination that reminded him of her late father, the previous king. "Captain," Elena said as he entered, "I remember more now that my head is clear. The people who kept me prisoner weren't just following orders. They were planning something for today." Elena told him about conversations she had overheard while pretending to be unconscious. The Northern Alliance, a coalition of kingdoms that had long envied Aldermere's prosperity, had been working with traitors inside the castle to create a succession crisis. Their plan was to reveal Elena's survival at the perfect moment, claiming that her death had been staged by King Edmund to eliminate a rival claimant to the throne. The foreign dignitaries who had arrived this morning were part of this scheme. They would accuse Edmund of murdering his own sister and demand that Elena be placed on the throne under Northern Alliance protection. It was a clever plan that would essentially make Aldermere a puppet state while appearing to restore the rightful heir. "But there's something else," Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The person organizing everything from inside the castle is someone we both know. Someone close to the king." Before Elena could reveal the name, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Marcus looked out his window to see royal guards searching every room and questioning servants. They were looking for something, or someone, and Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before they reached his quarters. He made a quick decision. "We need to get you to your brother immediately," he told Elena. "But we have to be careful. If the wrong people see you first, they'll claim you're an imposter or use you to start a war." Marcus disguised Elena in a servant's cloak and led her through the castle's secret passages that he had learned during his years of service. These narrow corridors, built into the walls for emergencies, allowed them to move unseen toward the king's private study. As they made their way through the hidden passages, Elena continued to share what she had learned during her captivity. The conspiracy reached deeper into the royal court than Marcus had imagined. Several trusted advisors, at least 2 members of the royal guard, and even some servants had been bought or coerced into participating in the scheme. The most shocking revelation came when Elena identified the mastermind. "It was Lord Chancellor Aldrich," she whispered as they approached the final passage to the king's study. "He's been planning this for years. He convinced everyone that hiding me was necessary for my protection, but he was really preparing to use me against Edmund when the time was right." Lord Aldrich had been King Edmund's most trusted advisor for over a decade. He had access to everything, knew all the kingdom's secrets, and had the authority to make arrangements without question. He had orchestrated Elena's fake death during the plague outbreak, using the chaos to hide his actions. For 3 years, he had kept her hidden while slowly building the Northern Alliance and preparing for this moment. Marcus felt sick as he realized how perfectly the plan had been executed. Aldrich had gained King Edmund's complete trust by appearing to help him through the succession crisis that followed Elena's supposed death. All the while, he had been the one creating the crisis in the first place. They reached the entrance to the king's study, and Marcus listened carefully before opening the hidden panel. He could hear voices inside, and one of them belonged to Lord Aldrich himself. The Chancellor was speaking with King Edmund about the Northern Alliance delegation and their demands for an investigation into Elena's death. "Your Majesty," Aldrich was saying, "these foreign agitators are clearly trying to destabilize our kingdom. They claim to have evidence that Princess Elena was murdered, but we both know she died of plague. Perhaps it would be wise to make an example of them for spreading such lies." Marcus felt Elena tense beside him. They both understood that Aldrich was manipulating the situation perfectly. By having the Northern Alliance make accusations that seemed impossible to prove, he was positioning himself to defend the king, while secretly preparing to produce the evidence that would destroy him. King Edmund's response revealed how completely he had been deceived. "I trust your judgment completely, Aldrich. You've been my rock through all of this. I don't know how I would have managed the kingdom's affairs without your guidance." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the study door. A guard entered to report that the search of the castle had turned up something interesting. They had found the empty trunk and traces of sleeping draught, suggesting that someone had been held prisoner in the royal quarters. Marcus knew this was the moment Aldrich had been waiting for. The Chancellor would now suggest that this proved foreign agents had infiltrated the castle, possibly to plant evidence against the king. It was the perfect setup for the final phase of his plan. But Marcus had heard enough. He pushed open the hidden panel and stepped into the study, with Elena close behind him. The effect was immediate and dramatic. King Edmund staggered backward as if he had seen a ghost, his face going pale as he stared at his supposedly dead sister. Lord Aldrich's carefully composed expression cracked for just a moment, revealing a flash of panic before he regained control. "Impossible," Aldrich said smoothly. But Marcus could see the wheels turning in the Chancellor's mind. This must be some kind of trick, an impostor sent by the Northern Alliance to support their claims. Elena pulled back her hood, revealing her unmistakable royal features. "Hello, brother," she said simply. "I think it's time we talked." The revelation that followed would shake the kingdom to its core. Elena told her story in clear, precise detail, explaining how she had been taken from her room 3 years ago by people she trusted, how she had been moved from place to place, and how she had been kept drugged and hidden while everyone believed her dead. King Edmund listened in growing horror and rage, his eyes never leaving his sister's face. When Elena finished speaking, there was a long moment of silence before the king turned to face his most trusted advisor. "Aldrich," Edmund said, his voice deadly quiet, "you will explain this." Now, but Lord Aldrich was not finished playing his cards. With a cold smile, he revealed that the Northern Alliance delegation was already in the throne room, along with witnesses who would testify to his version of events. According to his prepared story, King Edmund had discovered that Elena was still alive and had been planning to kill her permanently to secure his throne. The empty trunk and sleeping draught would be presented as evidence of the king's guilt, and Elena herself would be portrayed as a traumatized victim who had been manipulated into protecting her brother. The Northern Alliance would demand justice, and Aldrich would reluctantly support their call for Edmund to abdicate in favor of Elena, who would rule under Northern Alliance protection. "You see, Your Majesty," Aldrich said with false regret, "the truth can be shaped to serve many purposes. And I'm afraid the truth that will be believed today is the one that serves the greater good of regional stability." Marcus realized that even with Elena alive and free, they were still trapped in Aldrich's web. The Chancellor had spent years preparing for every possibility, and he had enough evidence and witnesses to make his version of events seem credible to the foreign delegation, and potentially to Aldermere's own nobles. The confrontation in the king's study had revealed the conspiracy, but it had also triggered the final phase of Aldrich's plan. The battle for the kingdom's future was about to begin, and Marcus knew that the next few hours would determine whether Aldermere remained free or fell under foreign control. The throne room had never felt more tense, as representatives from the Northern Alliance presented their case before an assembly of Aldermere's nobles. Marcus stood at attention near the wall, his hand ready on his sword, while Elena remained hidden in an adjoining chamber, where she could hear everything but remain unseen until the right moment. Lord Aldrich had orchestrated the proceedings masterfully. The foreign delegation presented evidence of King Edmund's supposed crimes, including testimonies from servants who claimed to have seen suspicious activities in the royal quarters. The empty trunk was displayed as proof that someone had been held prisoner, and the sleeping draft was cited as evidence of intent to harm. King Edmund sat on his throne, his face a mask of controlled fury as he listened to the accusations. Marcus could see that the king was struggling to contain his rage while trying to formulate a response that wouldn't make the situation worse. The leader of the Northern Alliance delegation, Duke Ravencrest, was a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes, who spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Your Majesty," he said in a voice that carried throughout the throne room, "these are serious charges that cannot be ignored. The evidence suggests that Princess Elena may have been murdered to secure your throne, and we demand a full investigation." Several of Aldermere's own nobles began to murmur among themselves. Marcus could see that some were genuinely shocked by the accusations, while others seemed to be calculating which side would benefit them most. The political balance of the kingdom hung in the balance. Lord Aldrich stepped forward, playing his role as the loyal advisor perfectly. "Your Majesty," he said with apparent reluctance, "as much as it pains me to say this, perhaps we should consider allowing an independent investigation. The kingdom's reputation depends on addressing these concerns openly." Marcus knew this was exactly what Aldrich wanted. An investigation controlled by the Northern Alliance would inevitably conclude that Edmund was guilty, and they would demand that he abdicate. Elena would then be placed on the throne as a puppet ruler, giving the Northern Alliance effective control over Aldermere. But Marcus and Elena had spent the morning preparing their own strategy. They had gathered evidence of Aldrich's treachery, including documents from his private chambers that revealed his correspondence with Northern Alliance agents. More importantly, they had identified the servants and guards who had been coerced into participating in the conspiracy. The moment had come to reveal the truth. Marcus stepped forward and requested permission to speak, a right granted to the captain of the guard in matters of kingdom security. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the throne room, "I have discovered evidence of a conspiracy against the crown that reaches to the highest levels of our government." The reaction was immediate. Duke Ravencrest looked annoyed at the interruption, while Lord Aldrich's eyes narrowed dangerously. Several nobles leaned forward with interest, sensing that the proceedings were about to take an unexpected turn. Marcus presented his evidence systematically, starting with the documents that proved Aldrich's secret communications with foreign agents. He then called forward several servants who had been threatened into participating in the conspiracy, but were now willing to testify truthfully. The servants told their stories of being forced to help move Elena from place to place, of being sworn to secrecy under threat of death, and of being instructed to plant evidence that would support accusations against the king. Their testimonies painted a clear picture of a carefully orchestrated plot that had been years in the making. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus called for Elena herself to appear. The hidden door opened, and Princess Elena walked into the throne room, alive and healthy, her royal bearing unmistakable despite the simple clothes she wore. The reaction was explosive. Several nobles gasped in shock, while others fell to their knees in amazement. The Northern Alliance delegation looked stunned, their carefully prepared accusations suddenly meaningless in the face of Elena's living presence. Elena approached the throne and knelt before her brother. "Your Majesty," she said formally, "I humbly request the right to testify about the crimes committed against me and against our kingdom." King Edmund's voice was thick with emotion as he granted her request. Elena then told her story to the assembled nobles, describing in detail how she had been kidnapped, hidden, and drugged, while everyone believed her dead. She spoke of overhearing plans to use her as a weapon against her brother, and of the foreign agents who had promised to liberate Aldermere from Edmund's rule. As Elena spoke, Marcus watched Lord Aldrich carefully. The Chancellor was trying to maintain his composure, but sweat beaded on his forehead as his perfect plan crumbled around him. Duke Ravencrest looked increasingly uncomfortable, as it became clear that his delegation had been manipulated into supporting a false cause. When Elena finished her testimony, she turned to face Lord Aldrich directly. "Chancellor," she said, her young voice carrying surprising authority, "would you care to explain why you told me that my brother wanted me dead, or why you assured the Northern Alliance that I had been murdered when you knew perfectly well that I was alive?" Aldrich's composure finally cracked. Realizing that his position was hopeless, he attempted one last desperate gambit. Drawing a concealed dagger, he lunged toward Elena, apparently hoping to eliminate the evidence of his treachery. Marcus was ready for this possibility. His sword cleared its sheath in a single smooth motion, intercepting Aldrich's attack before the blade could reach Elena. The Chancellor's dagger went flying across the throne room, and Aldrich found himself on his knees with Marcus's sword at his throat. "Arrest him," King Edmund commanded, his voice echoing through the now silent throne room. "Lord Aldrich is charged with treason, conspiracy, kidnapping, and attempted murder." The royal guards moved quickly to secure the fallen Chancellor, while the Northern Alliance delegation found themselves in an extremely awkward position. Duke Ravencrest, to his credit, immediately stepped forward to address the situation. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "it appears that my delegation has been grievously deceived. We came here believing we were seeking justice for a murdered princess, but it is clear that we have been manipulated into supporting a conspiracy against your rightful rule." The Duke's admission helped to defuse the immediate crisis, but Marcus knew that the political consequences would continue to reverberate for months to come. Several of Aldermere's nobles who had seemed ready to support the Northern Alliance's accusations now rushed to reaffirm their loyalty to King Edmund. In the days that followed, the full extent of the conspiracy was revealed. Lord Aldrich's private papers contained detailed plans for the gradual subjugation of Aldermere, with the Northern Alliance eventually installing their own governors to rule in Elena's name. The plot had been even more ambitious than Marcus had initially realized, involving multiple kingdoms and representing a serious threat to the balance of power in the entire region. The trial of Lord Aldrich became a public spectacle that served to demonstrate both the king's justice and his mercy. Despite the magnitude of his crimes, Edmund chose to commute Aldrich's death sentence to life imprisonment, partly at Elena's request. The princess argued that enough blood had been spilled and that true strength lay in showing restraint even toward one's enemies. Elena's return to public life required careful management. After 3 years of supposed death, her reappearance needed to be explained to the kingdom's people in a way that would strengthen rather than undermine the monarchy's credibility. King Edmund and his advisors crafted a narrative that emphasized Elena's bravery in going into hiding to protect herself from foreign assassins, and her loyalty in returning to help expose the conspiracy. Marcus found himself elevated to a new position as Chief of Royal Security, responsible for ensuring that such a conspiracy could never again penetrate so deeply into the kingdom's government. His first act was to establish a network of loyal agents who could monitor potential threats both within the castle and beyond its walls. The relationship between Aldermere and the Northern Alliance required delicate rebuilding. Duke Ravencrest proved to be an honorable man who had been genuinely deceived by false evidence, and he worked with King Edmund to establish new agreements that would prevent future misunderstandings. Princess Elena, despite her youth, emerged from the crisis as a figure of considerable political importance. Her survival and testimony had not only saved the kingdom from foreign domination but had also demonstrated her courage and intelligence. Many nobles began to view her as a valuable asset to the royal family and a potential leader in her own right. The empty trunk that had started everything was eventually placed in the castle's museum as a reminder of how close Aldermere had come to losing its independence. Elena sometimes visited it during her walks through the castle, and Marcus often found her there, lost in thought about the strange twists of fate that had saved their kingdom. The conspiracy had been defeated, but its lessons remained fresh in everyone's minds. The kingdom had learned that freedom required constant vigilance, that trust must be earned and verified, and that even the most elaborate plots could be undone by courage, loyalty, and the determination to seek the truth. Marcus continued to serve the royal family with distinction, but he never forgot the rainy night when he had heard breathing from inside a wooden trunk. That moment of curiosity and courage had changed the course of history, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the simplest acts of paying attention to what doesn't belong. Elena grew into a wise and capable princess who used her experience to help strengthen the kingdom's defenses against future threats. She often credited Marcus with saving not just her life but the independence of Aldermere itself. The bond forged between them during those dangerous days remained strong throughout their lives, a testament to the power of loyalty and courage in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The kingdom of Aldermere prospered in the years following the conspiracy, its people united by the knowledge that they had overcome a serious threat through their commitment to truth and justice. The royal family's reputation was stronger than ever, built not just on tradition and ceremony but on proven courage and genuine care for their people's welfare.